Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to another minigame podcast for Friday, April 11th. We'll do about an hour of warm-up, and then we will jump into the video game news. I am experimenting here. First of all, streaming a little bit earlier than I have in the past couple of streams, which weirdly it seems like the later I stream the better, but 2 in the morning for me is too late. But even then I got a decent amount of views. But yeah, I ran my macro to open up all the news tabs, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel here has a pack draw, so we'll show that off too. And it's still got a few things to tweak, but it actually did manage to complete today, so it did a little bit of catch up. But apparently in the process it also opened up so many tabs that Firefox took up 100% of my 64 gigabytes of RAM. Which, yeah, that's a problem. And it feels like it's just added perhaps some instability, or instability if I'm going to use a real world, to my computer. As far as when I was looking at OBS, it looked like there was some frame lags happening here, but maybe not. Maybe once everything has been done, everything has just been done. Maybe it's more of a case that Windows was caching. I know a lot of that RAM even after I closed Firefox and restarted it. But yeah, main problem still with my macros that it's picking up some links that have invisible characters, tab characters, new line enter characters, that it shouldn't be picking up, as far as treating those like links that you can actually click on. Some of my news sources obviously have a link, and then they're putting a new line and a tab and things like that at the end of the link, but still as if they are part of the link, which wouldn't really affect Firefox or Chrome or any other browser, but is affecting what I'm doing with it using UI Vision to make macros. I'm gonna have to kind of hurry a little bit today because I don't want to be 2.5 hours into the stream and fall asleep or start to get sleepy. I'm also experimenting as we scroll down the 24-hour peak concurrent chart here with having my door open, which maybe will let some of the heat that I think my computer just generated out my room. And so I don't know if that's really making any extra noise that's being picked up by the stream, but certainly feels like there's a little bit of extra noise that I can hear, certainly. And so that alone might be more of a reason to better control the room. But yeah, even now when the air conditioner isn't even on, it's just circulating via the AC's fan. It sounds pretty noisy. It feels very much like I was just streaming because it was like 2 to 5 in the morning on Thursday that I did stream, so it doesn't even feel like there's been a lot of news or noise that has happened. Here we'll quickly go down the gotcha charts, which haven't really changed. So a lot of these news sources are definitely going to be just me repeating the same information from stream to stream if they are monthly updated things. And maybe there's a cut screen I should make, or interstitial screen is what I think I was calling them, to explain the monthly sources. But then again, maybe that's just a waste of time, and we should just show the sales numbers for the gacha. Speaking of gacha, I'm still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket to no new interest, really. The sneak peek event for the Wonder Picks has ended, and I've gone on to a single player experience. A special event. But yeah, I definitely am not finding free time to play Pokemon TCG to get any of that ranked settings higher, nor do I think I actually could get very high in the ranking for the player versus player, because I just don't think I have particularly good decks, which is a fault of my own, really. I should probably just look up a top tier meta deck online and build it, because I probably have enough cards at this point to do that. But yeah, I'm definitely not playing Pokemon TCG Pocket. Instead, I'm playing the well, I'm not also really doing anything special with Memento Mori, although over the past week I do think I have put some extra time into it to level up my characters and get a little bit further than where they've been stuck at for probably a month or two, which is kind of just how Memento Mori works, is that you hit a plateau of difficulty and you can't go any further until you wait a few days to get the resources to level up your characters to make them stronger to go further. So yes, the vast majority of my time has been spent playing Modica Magica and testing out that new game, which, yeah, they are very quickly putting new content in. They've cycled out the April Fool's Day content already. They've cycled out at least one paid only promotion of a character, which I don't know if there's going to be any other way you ever get that character at all. They've weirdly, I think maybe over half of the characters that you can collect in the gacha game are not from any Modica Magica, whatever it's actually called, anime I've seen. So either I'm really far behind, which is very possible, or they are just making up characters out of nowhere. But weirdly, as they are quickly putting in more and more content, I guess just to keep people playing, they dropped the ball and admitted that they updated the Japanese version a few days earlier than the Western version, and so they clearly said, hey, we have a priority here, and we're gonna obviously prioritize the Japanese audience first, who will spend way more money and are much more comfortable in spending way more money than Westerners are, and frankly would be the target audience for the game anyways. But they still have not really proven to me that the game has any roots to it as far as having a strong foundation and something that you'd really just need to play in the long run. I have, for one reason or another, tapped out on one of the 3 main stories, which is weird to me, because I thought finishing one of the main story sections would always unlock the next main story section, but it just didn't happen. Instead, it unlocked a separate parallel main story section, so maybe in that there's a viewing order of the story that you're supposed to experience, which is very believable because the whole story does involve time travel and going back and redoing the same thing over and over again, hoping for different outcomes. So yeah, of the three modes, there was story mode, challenge mode, or battle mode. I'm not sure what it was called. And now there's this like side story mode, which I haven't yet put the time into. I've also went and put extra effort to just try and level up my characters even more, and there is just going to be some level caps that eventually, if I can get just a massive amount of resources and dump it into the 5 most important characters I want to play as for one team, I'm going to max out those characters to those level caps and then start to have even extra resources to potentially make even the other characters level up as well. But yeah, it does feel like I'm just getting closer and closer to hitting a point where I really can't do much of anything on Modica Magica. And unlike Memento Mori, I don't think just waiting a few days will give me enough resources to level up the team to go to another location or get a little bit further. Clearly that's the goal they're going for, but I just don't think the balance really is going to be there. It's interesting here we see Autodesk being mentioned. Autodesk, to my mind, mainly known for making drafting software. AutoCAD is the name of it. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if there is perhaps a spin-off product for AutoCAD that would let you make 3D wireframes or draft things in 3D in a way that you would use that technology in games. I definitely have seen Autodesk, and this logo is not the logo I remember last time I saw Autodesk. Seems like they may have gotten a new logo since then. Last time I saw Autodesk was also many years ago. But yeah, I've seen their logo in a couple of games, and it always felt very weird that you'd use that software. But yeah, when you're particularly talking about old software and old games, they were desperate certainly to find any kind of software that would be the best to use to make video games. Like particularly the transition from 2D to 3D had a whole new generation of game developers trying to learn new things. Is so much nicer now that you can make very generalized statements and say, hey, all you really need is Unreal Engine, or all you really need is Unity, or all you really need is the Godot engine, as far as 3 suggestions. And within that, you kind of don't need any other software that would be too weird. Maybe if you preferred it, you might use Photoshop. Maybe if you preferred it, you might use Blender to make 3D assets. You might have your artist on your team using those softwares and giving you those 3D assets that then would be imported into something like the Godot engine. But I definitely don't think you would have somebody trained to use AutoCAD that you would ever hire and have to work with them in their expertise in using AutoCAD to then import something into Unity or Unreal Engine or something along that lines, or Godot engine. Yeah, I just don't think AutoCAD would be it. Actually, let's see what AutoCAD looked like these days. It probably hasn't changed much, if I was to guess. Vectorworks. Is AutoCAD even Like, yeah. See what this even looks like these days. And I'm not even sure if that is what the product is now, as far as what they are pushing. Yeah. AutoCAD still feels like it's a big deal. Fusion, Maya, 3D Max. These all were software I think owned by other companies at one point. But yeah, I think their bread and butter still is very much AutoCAD. AutoCAD is kind of a unique software in that it's designed, or at least it was designed, to be basically keyboard only navigations, and that you could type in pretty much everything just using a text command line input. Yeah, in this video they're saying every year they enhance AutoCAD. Really, I imagine you can't do much to improve what it does, because drafting in general is drafting in general is pretty standard and hasn't changed in at least 50 years. And what's funny is what you really could do instead of this, instead of using AutoCAD, is use just like 3D Home Builder. I think is one of the smartphone apps that you can do to make a 3D depiction of everything if you're just a hobbyist trying to design your dream home. Now, due to rules and regulations, you would need a lot of money, certainly, to actually have an actual architect take your dream home and turn it into a design. These pictures are not going anywhere. Maybe it's because my plugin. Yeah, they're just here. You would need a lot of money to have an actual architect design a house so it follows all of the city, state, and county code enforcements, and basically you need an architect who is good at coordinating between potentially 5 other architects who are going to be the plumbing guys, the electric guys, the structural guys, knowing all the special rules and regulations to make sure you build a house that doesn't fall over. And the vast majority of houses are not built that way in any way at all. There are just pre-registered, pre-patented, copyrighted houses that are available for sale, and you can basically just buy one of those designs and get something close to what you want for much cheaper than having to pay somebody. And what's weird here is that they're really doing a terrible job of showing off their software, because their software still does look incredibly ugly. It's designed to print blueprints on a plotter, a giant printer that prints in vector graphics instead of bitmap graphics. So it uses math to draw a point from one point to another in a vector instead of drawing a huge photo that just has a pixel here and a pixel here and a pixel here and a pixel here, and then goes to the next line and continues to do that. Yeah, but I would be very interested. Yeah, kind of wonder when the last game even would have been that would have used, and this is probably a search that's not going to really work, video games design solutions, software for game developers. I do have an article here. Do we have a clue as to when this article was made? Well, they seem to be still offering something here. Here we have a 3D model of one of the Cyberpunk 2077 characters. And this is definitely not AutoCAD that would be used to make this. I'd have to assume this is all Maya, which is, I believe, 3D modeling software. Yeah, rigging to create skeletal structures. Maybe they even have something for motion capture, apparently. Yeah, 3ds Max, Maya, and flow production tracking, which seems like a secondary software. So that may be where Autodesk has expanded a lot too. Unfortunately, I don't feel like I can say I would recommend any of Autodesk's software, because if it's anything like it used to be, it was extremely expensive software that was very much like Photoshop, and then it had annual renewing fees and licenses. They give like students and educators discounts just to lock in a new generation using this software, and it's not open source, which, yeah, the amount of expense compared to using an open source software, which, yes, maybe AutoCAD is the best for drafting as an example, but is it $2,030 a year better than some of the open source free software you can do? Probably not. Of course, if you're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, this may just be the cost of doing business. But yeah, Autodesk puts Photoshop to shame as far as their annual pricing here. Most expensive software here is Product Design and Manufacturing Collection, which seems to be like a bundle. But yeah, if you're going to go Maya for 3 years, it'd be $5,000. If we're going to go AutoCAD for 3 years, it'd be $6,000. And even the sale here for Fusion for 3 years is $2,000, and actually you don't even get a discount there. You only get a discount if you buy it yearly. So just like massively expensive. And I would heavily suspect, for as long as AutoCAD has been around, that the people who made AutoCAD version 1.0 are probably not still working at Autodesk or getting any kind of residuals for it. This almost certainly is a holding company, in the sense that's, for the most part, just selling software that long ago was designed and probably long ago was perfected. It's funny how these softwares that could have just stayed the same price that they were originally could have just become the default standard that people would use, but because AutoCAD, for instance, or Photoshop more often, became this service that was just had an annual fee, it effectively encouraged more and more people to think about not using Photoshop, and encouraged more and more people to make software that's almost as good as Photoshop, or does enough for most people. Yeah, again, I cannot recommend Photoshop You could certainly use GIMP 3.0, which just relatively recently came out. That's an open source software that looks a lot like Photoshop, although inherently Photoshop looks a lot like a software that was created for the Apple II, so even Photoshop basically stole the general layout and design concepts that people were already familiar with. So yeah, the open source free GIMP software, GNU image manipulation program, is highly recommended if you're going to do that. Although a lot of it too, I don't know if you even really need to use anything to make a game, particularly if you're using like the Godot engine. Yes, you can go into Blender, and that is another free open source software, and make a 3D model in Blender if you want to, but I'm not sure you actually have to. Inherently, my experience has been that you run into artists that have been taught on one software or come to love one software, and they just refuse to try anything different or experiment. That artists, even in a technical field as far as making 2D or 3D digital art, are just not particularly interested in the technology or learning new technology. So yes, I always try to get people while they are young with the first software they've ever tried, and definitely recommend trying free open source software first. If you find it's good enough, you'll never bother to even pay or try for the paid software, or maybe you'll get hired on at some place and somebody else will be paying for it. I have been making a little bit of progress playing Blackwell Convergence, which is an understatement because I beat the game and now am punishing myself effectively by going through it in a speed run a second time around. One, to try and get the remaining achievements, and two, to listen to the commentary. Why do I say I'm punishing myself? Is because Dave Gilbert, the makers of these games, is not particularly good at making commentary, and every commentary I've heard so far has made me like him less. Blackwell Convergence gets a little wild at the end, wilder than you would expect for a game that had already established ghosts and murder mysteries where you help ghosts realize that they're dead and cross over. It gets even crazier than that, and certainly is setting up for the next game in the series to be even crazier. So there is this danger that the whole experience will be completely off the rails by the end. But overall, I would say I absolutely loved Convergence. It did feel like it was a major improvement over Blackwell Unbound. Now, I don't know why this thumbnail is so ugly, though. That's like the one thing, that this thumbnail that's on the main menu, also in a slightly different form, just looks really, really bad. And I just don't get the reasoning behind that. Because like the first game, Blackwell Legacy, here looks better in the thumbnail. The second game, which is cut content from Blackwell Convergence, looks better. And I accidentally loaded Blackwell Deception, which would be the next game in the series, and that looks way better too. So just some weird inconsistency there. Yeah, and then I'm making also minimal progress, I would say, as far as cleaning and decluttering my house and remodeling. Like, not particularly super motivated to kill myself trying to accomplish any of that, knowing in particular, since I'm probably just not going to get anything done for a while anyways. But yeah, I do have ambitions, and I am making slight bits of improvement here and there. But yeah, a lot of a lot in my life right now is just up in the air, and has been up in the air from months and months and months, since basically November of last year. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if most of those things are still going to be up in the air November of this year. But yeah, there's not really too much to say. I just have to try and stay up on things. I'm still experimenting with cooking without eggs, using applesauce, or a quarter of a cup of applesauce to equate to 1 egg, which worked fine on a yellow cake, maybe gave it a slight applesauce taste, and has worked fairly well now on sugar cookies, although I would say that maybe I put way too much butter in with the sugar cookies, and so they are not particularly brown or dried out. See if the Taos Principle Reawakened is going well. Yes, 89% positive. And I would say the sugar cookies in particular, yeah, either got more moisture because of the applesauce, and so maybe there needed to be less butter to accommodate that, because it definitely was very liquidy batter when I was making the what they call drop cookies, and that you're just dropping them into a circle on a pan, and you're not planning on cutting them out using a cookie cutter and making a sheet of it. Although, for as watery as it would have been, I should have actually used the other instructions where it would have been cookie cutter style. But yeah, it definitely tastes a little bit more of applesauce. The cookies did. I guess eggs, to my tongue at least, have a very neutral taste, where applesauce is getting the job done as acting as kind of a protein that has the right chemical balance to be used in baking, but it does add an apple flavor, which is not a problem for me. I think apple flavor is just fine. Might get a little bit weird or a little bit boring if I started to try and like make chocolate chip cookies and then there was also a hint of applesauce on it, but yeah, even then I'd probably be perfectly happy with the outcome. At the very least, I'm not throwing anything away. I'm wasting food, which is more than I can say for baking soda and vinegar as an alternative to eggs. I also briefly, thinking about remodeling, wondered why all of my door frames and doors are painted at all. And that is an interesting thought, is why do people paint doors and door frames? And I guess the answer there is that in most cases these days, particularly internal doors, are mostly cardboard and pre-painted at the factory, so a door frame to match the door would then be painted, probably, if done correctly, with an oil-based paint. But boy, once I had the thought of just raw wood, I think that would be so much nicer if it was good raw wood. But it probably wouldn't be, and there'd probably be a bunch of nail holes that you would have to plug. But even that, if done right, wouldn't be a issue to me. But yeah, unfortunately I have what I have, and at best I think I could get the door frames, door jambs, and doors I have painted once again. But yeah, I don't even know if that's really feasible, because it may require a lot of stripping and removing of layers of paint. There's a bunch of globs, and just it may very well be that they painted it with latex paint instead of oil-based paint. It's just done wrong, really. I don't know what specifically it is about door frames and doors that requires oil-based paint, but that is definitely what I've heard as far as what needs to happen. Yeah, we looked through that entire AAA initiative. I didn't even say what I was doing there, and saw exactly one game that interested me. Yeah, and refurbs are still fairly hard to come by. We do have some more news as far as the Switch 2, and as we just get more and more news and people eventually get their actual hands on the Switch 2, it will be this constant reevaluation as far as where does the 2 or 3 year old Steam Deck really line up now as far as a price comparison and a value comparison, even though it is very much still always going to be apples to oranges, as far as you're just not going to get Mario Kart World if you buy a Steam Deck, not legitimately anyways, and it probably would be pretty hard. Like the one thing that really could kill the Switch 2 is that if emulators came out day one and said, oh yeah, all the Switch 2 games are totally perfectly emulated right now on a Steam Deck right now. Which, yeah, that would be a crushing blow to the Switch 2 if that was the case, where you could get potentially a 512 OLED Steam Deck and pay a lot less for games overall and potentially emulate Switch 2 games. But yeah, that's probably not the case. And there is definitely a conversation that has to be had that nobody wants to listen to, I'm sure, and nobody wants to believe, in that we have just hit a pinnacle of hardware being too expensive and just a lack of efficiency not being available. Like the next generation of the Xbox and the PlayStation are probably going to be $700 or $800 devices, depending based on what $700 or $800 is worth right now. And yeah, Nintendo's opened the door for $100 games, and so gaming is just getting more and more expensive. And unless we have a huge market crash, there's likely never going to be a lowering of those prices. You could see somebody come in, particularly with the Switch 2's price, and try and sell you a $250, $300 device, but whatever that device is, just because of the cost of hardware, it's likely going to be a very underpowered piece of equipment. And yeah, I don't know what we can really expect to fix that other than just cell phone models, which at some point the cell phone model of we're going to just charge you an annual fee for 2 years and lock you into a contract is probably the direction that game consoles are going to have to go. And I could see cell phone companies being more than eager to go in that direction, particularly with handhelds. Like, I think a lot of people would be very happy to get a 512 OLED Steam Deck for $200 down, and then let's say $30 a month for cell phone connectivity and unlimited data, which data would pretty much be it. I don't think you'd make a Steam Deck that could actually receive or send phone calls, although it probably wouldn't be too difficult to add that feature. But yeah, the conversation people just don't want to have is that things are getting more and more expensive as far as hardware, and I don't see that changing. And so yeah, either we are approaching, I suspect, a time of going without, which I think is going to be the case. Is that just a lot of parents are going to tell their kids, no, you're not getting a Switch 2. Blue Prince is new. What is this? Some kind of puzzle exploration game. Interesting. Or if you can't have kids go without, which in fairness that may very well be the case, this may be an era of embracing Steam in one form factor or another, whether it's a Steam Deck or just a gaming PC of some sort or a laptop, and then embracing way cheaper games. Which, yeah, as far as PC gamers who already mostly game on PC and Steam, I think we'll also see a lot of them going without also, instead focusing on just playing older games, which we've already seen a trend in that direction. Still can't get my fall list actually open, and yeah, that's a concerning issue, is that once again I may have just messed up my follow list by having way too many games on it and have no way to actually reduce the number of games on my follow list. Okay, so yeah, we'll go through Video Games Chronicle news here. My macro did actually open all of these articles. It weirdly seems like it missed Gematsu though, and GameDeveloper.com, but it did get Gaming on Linux, so about 50-50 success there. Weirdly though, I kind of wonder if even having 2 or 3 of the starter tabs that are just the exact same thing, it's just not going to work, because at least once when I did try and run it, it did feel like the tabs were still falling asleep and just not accessible by my macros because they were going asleep or being put to sleep, which is, you know, a weird way of phrasing it. Anyways, so we have Toys for Bob, quote, would love to work on the new Banjo-Kazooie. The beloved Rare franchise has been missing for over a decade. I don't think they can work on something unless whoever owns the IP would say yes. Is Banjo-Kazooie, I guess, is the question, actually owned by Rare, which is now owned by Microsoft, or did Nintendo have some involvement in it also? Because it definitely felt like to me that Banjo-Kazooie was one of the several games that was produced by Rare for Nintendo, and Nintendo may have had some funding in it and publishing rights in it, which may mean Rare never actually owns 100% of any of their previous series. It's pretty obvious, like Donkey Kong Country, made by Rare, is owned by Nintendo, but maybe Banjo-Kazooie is too. On the other hand, it is also worth pointing out that Banjo-Kazooie was very similar to Mario 64, and so it often felt like an also-ran product, and I don't feel like the first couple of games did anything particularly unique, and then I think eventually they made some spin-off games that were kind of better. The bigger story, though, around this, other than just saying, yes, we'd love to do that, because I'm sure they're looking for work to do anything, is that the Banjo-Kazooie series has already been superseded by another series where you have one animal character and a flying character. It's a gecko and a bat. As far as that new series, I can't remember the name of it, and they already came out with a game with those characters, and then it didn't even sell well enough, so they've already made a spin-off game that plays fairly different with those characters. And yeah, we are far, far past the point where you actually need mascot characters as an idea anyways. So if you can't make a 3D platformer that sells well in modern times, which maybe you can't, and you don't need mascot characters, it's hard to be certain whether you actually need, or whether you can actually do anything with those kinds of games in the first place. I guess I'll leave it at that. Zelda Breath of the Wild on Switch 2 won't be coming with the DLC, Nintendo has confirmed. It is going to be available for purchase for around $20. So even if it sells for the original like $60 you'd expect it would sell for, if not lower, because it probably should be discounted as an older game, you're just bumping it back up as soon as you want to get the DLC. And the whole nuts and bolts Banjo-Kazooie concept is basically ripped off in Breath of the Wild. Or, no, Tears of the Kingdom, not Breath of the Wild, the sequel to Breath of the Wild. I didn't even know Breath of the Wild had DLC, but then again, I didn't even finish playing Breath of the Wild anyways. A weird game for somebody who's played the original Zelda game and Ocarina of Time and many, many other Zelda games. Breath of the Wild just felt like a very odd game to have basically 4 moving temples that were actually fairly small and didn't really feel like temples at all. This Pokemon is getting his first trading card in over 15 years. This Pokemon last received a new trading card in 2009. I have no idea what this Pokemon is. This is once again Video Games Chronicle talking about Pokemon trading card game instead of any digital versions of the trading card game. Let's see. So what's the name of this Pokemon if translated to English? Chingling, I guess is the name of it, which sounds a little racist, which maybe is why it hasn't had a new card in 15 years. It looks like it's a bell, possibly with some kind of Buddhist wrappings around it, or it's supposed to look something like that. But yeah, as far as actual gamers playing actual video games, there's really no reason why you would care about that. Let's see, Mafia the Old Country's release date has appeared online. It was published and quickly deleted. What was the date that they said? August 8th. That information, even if it's accurate, again proves to be kind of useless. Like we are just not really in a situation where people are going to get super hyped about a early release of a release date for Mafia the Old Country in particular. when the game is actually available for pre-order. Some people will pre-order it, I'm sure, but I don't think the hype is going to be much bigger than that. Naughty Dog has announced a complete PS5, The Last of Us, with a $120 collector's edition. I'd assume this is part 1 and part 2, which interestingly, yeah, part 1 and part 2 remastered is what it comes with, physical editions of that. So why not a part 1 remastered included in that? That's certainly a question, but the bigger question is they're using the phrase complete, so they are just admitting that as far as Naughty Dog is concerned, and as far as PlayStation has let them go and say it, there is not going to be a part 3 of Last of Us. Which storyline wise, it probably wouldn't have made a lot of sense for a part 3, and reception wise, it almost certainly wouldn't have made any sense for a part 3. I definitely could see though how Sony could have just shoved a bunch of money in Naughty Dog's face to say, hey, make it part 3, put some new characters in it, make it the next generation. Let's just churn out something called The Last of Us Part 3 as quickly as possible and hope that we can get the hype to continue or be regained around this series instead of letting the series die. Particularly, we're going to also see that a season 3 of the TV show has been greenlit. So now there might very well be this weird situation where the TV show just keeps on going, and like they probably have said that they wouldn't be willing to do that, but it certainly would be weird if the TV show kept going and then all of a sudden that created a demand to make a video game version of what the show had gone and done. Although I don't know if there would be a lot of demand for people who had watched the show to then go play the events in a video game form. Like, inherently, Last of Us's gameplay falls kind of flat. It is just stealth, first third-person shooting, as far as I can understand it, and it's really the story and the cutscenes that play a bigger role than the actual gameplay. Yeah, maybe Naughty Dog would be better off if they just worked on a new series and a new IP. That being said, I don't know if the funding will even be there for that. I could definitely see Sony just kind of collapsing in on itself and letting all the second-party developers run out of business and just close up shop instead of supporting second-party developers to make the games that Sony can't really make as first-party developers. Or Sony making the mistake to think that they can just continue to court only third-party developers who are making games for multiple consoles, and that Sony will just stick around as a number 2 to the Switch 2 in at least Japan. And yeah, at a certain level, Sony can just stick around and do very little because they can always say, well, at least we're not as bad off as Microsoft is. But at some point, Microsoft might go in a very different direction, and they're trying to go in a very different direction to the point where they'll stop saying that they are a console developer in the first place at all. Here we have an interesting story. You don't see this too much. Rhyme Studios, Rhyme is the name of the game. Tequila Works is currently auctioning off its game rights for hundreds of euros. The Spanish studio filed for insolvency last year. Now, Rhyme looked really nice, but it really didn't have a lot of game. And I can't really tell you anything about the story. I don't think it was very impactful either. But it was definitely one of the games that tricked me into wanting to play it, and then it ran pretty poorly. So I guess you probably have to be a citizen of Madrid to be in this auction. Let's see. The intangible assets owned by Tequila Works, including video game IPs, in development titles, and the Tequila Works brands. So, some other company, you would think if there any company cared or had any money, would probably scoop this up for a lot more than 320 euros. Let's just assume a euro is about equivalent to $1. Let's see, you get to the rhyme trademark without contractual restrictions. Now the thing here is buying this may also come with paying lawyers a lot of money to read all the paperwork and make sure that you actually are free and clear of this, although maybe buying it through a bankruptcy, insolvency scenario means that you're more likely to be free and clear on the contracts, and nobody else can come back and say they own the trademark or the rights to the game. There is a publishing contract with Greybox, which may mean that Greybox would have to be dealt with. Yeah. And what I hate about this though is that it says the auction here, but then there's no links to the auction, where it would be very interesting to see where the auction might be now. Apparently they had a vertical slice. I heard somebody use the phrase vertical wedge or game wedges instead of a vertical slice. I wonder if that means the same as a vertical slice or is a slightly different idea. But they were working on an open world adventure game called Ancient Mariner, and a co-op adventure game called Dungeon Tour, and an action title called Brawler Crawler. All of those titles probably not what they would have actually been available. The brand with the websites and social media accounts is at 170 euros. I'd also have to assume that this is also just nobody's bid on it yet. Their debut game 2012's Deadlight and notable releases in years since have included 2017's Rhyme and The Sexy Brutale and 2019's Guilt. So yeah, I played The Sexy Brutale too, and it was alright, but perhaps a little too repetitive. Yeah. This is, unfortunately, I really wish there was a link here to the auction to see, but I can't find one. Unfortunately, overall though, this is an example of where even a game company that's trying to really do well, and they're not just asset flipping garbage games, although maybe some of Rhyme was perhaps just underutilizing pre-made assets. Here's the auction site. Let's see if that takes us specifically to where we are. Let's see if we'll just zap some things here. So yeah, the Invisible Hours 2. Yeah, they made 4 release games. Rhyme spelled R-H-Y-M-E here. I think it had a different name in different occasions. They had 4 for games in development and all of that. Yeah. 32 days here. I think is, what is this? Again, I assume you have to be a Spanish citizen though. And that might explain a lot of it. Although maybe you just have to be part of the European Union. But we can see the prices have gone up quite a bit now, tenfold. That being said, even that price seems kind of ridiculously low. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't be surprised if there really isn't that many people in Madrid as far as game companies, if you specifically have to be a Madrid citizen to buy it. I also wouldn't be surprised if this was straight up just a scam and this wasn't actually the right site and Video Games Chronicles just got it all wrong. But let's take it on face value and say that it is what Video Games Chronicles says. Once again, I just have to point out that it's a shame that even companies that try and do turn out okay games, I mean, it definitely was middle of the road quality games as far as Rydo goes, they often just fail. Creating games has just become way too expensive. And yeah, it's not like Rydo was even trying to do hyper realistic graphics, but the cost is still just too high. And maybe some of that is hardware, which we've talked about as far as like the Switch 2 being too expensive and computer hardware just being too expensive. And maybe some of that is software, which we talked about as far as Autodesk being an example of software that's way too expensive. Yeah. With the evolution of computers, we would have thought that things would have gotten cheaper, but instead things got fancier. Which, yeah, that is something we've seen in other industries, certainly too. Cars never got commoditized and cheaper to the point where you're paying $1,000 for a brand new car. Instead, cars got more and more safety features added to them, and more radio features and entertainment features added to them, and auto driving and things like that. So yeah, I'll leave the conversation at that. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to take a short bathroom break, so I'm gonna pause and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Yeah, weirdly, I haven't dropped any frames at all from rendering lag. Well, 16 out of 258,000, which there is something about OBS that it always drops a couple, and it hasn't skipped any frames due to encoding lag. So apparently as soon as I started streaming, it fixed whatever it was running into as far as a problem there. Which, okay, that solves that. I shouldn't go looking for problems if they aren't really there. It was definitely a gamble to start streaming instead of just rebooting my computer, which is really what I should have done out of an abundance of caution. Of course, there's always that risk with Windows in particular. You reboot your computer and then it just doesn't boot up again. Let's see. Sifu's developer football game Rematch is coming to Game Pass. Full launch details have been revealed. Interesting to go from a game like Sifu to a soccer football game. I wonder if there's going to be any elements like Sifu in Rematch. Doesn't look like it. It looks like it is just an actual soccer game, perhaps with some Rocket League type visuals to it, which in a funny way is almost bringing Rocket League full circle. You see an actual female soccer player, it looked like there. But yeah. The implication here is that it is intergendered football being played. Which, yeah, that would be interesting if that happened in the real world. I don't think they particularly encourage it or allow it. But yeah. As far as I can tell, female soccer is nowhere as popular as male soccer is, in the same way that female basketball in the United States is nowhere as popular as male basketball. But that has nothing to do with the video game, so let's just move on. Alright, we're gonna probably never avoid seeing this thumbnail at this point from Video Games Chronicle, that they are just gonna, they made this thumbnail, they're going to use it, or it's not even really a thumbnail. I guess, yeah, the last time I actually called something a thumbnail that was a thumbnail probably was 10 years ago. This would be a image, I guess, is best is what you could call it, banner maybe. Anyways, Nintendo Switch 2's US price is unlikely to rise if the Trump tariff remains at 10%, an analyst says. So, once again, we are seeing articles from just analysts who make their money by saying things and don't really care if what they say is true or not. Nintendo is reportedly importing millions of Switch 2 units from Vietnam, where a 46% tariff has been threatened. So yeah, Nintendo is effectively trying to dodge tariffs by shipping them from Vietnam. But at a certain point, the idea of a tariff, if it was well thought out and well implemented, would have to consider each component's country of origin, not just where a final product is assembled, which is probably what's happening in Vietnam. I don't think Vietnam has the rare earth minerals and all of the components from like TSMC for the CPUs and the chips to make a Nintendo Switch from scratch. So yeah, I wouldn't be, I definitely have heard stories of people shipping things to a country like Vietnam, and then one screw is put into the case of the thing in Vietnam, and then they can say it's assembled in Vietnam to avoid tariffs. Yeah. Boy, do I wish we were living in the Star Trek future instead of the present we are currently living in that you could just have a 3D printer or a replicator spit out things when you wanted them, instead of relying on very damaging processes both to the societies where things are assembled and the environment of the world to assemble things. So we get a follow-up from the story that Video Games Chronicle talked about previously, and yet once again I'm going to point out that they are not willing to tell us the name of this game, so we can't see it for ourselves and make any decisions, which Video Games Chronicle being a UK based company, the UK citizens do unfortunately fall in line a lot more towards censorship. They don't have anywhere the kinds of protections around free speech as people in the United States do, and yeah, they do tend to just follow in line with the government and the monarchy pretty easily. So this game that allegedly is promoting sexual assault has been removed for sale in the UK, Australia, and Canada, which it may very well be the case that there are strict censorship laws in the UK, Australia, and Canada already. We know Australia very much has censorship. I haven't heard a lot about Canada, but it's probably going to fall in line with the UK. Women in Games as a charity, which we should have looked that up on Charity Navigator, actually, if we're going to look up any charities. Called for Valve to remove the game earlier this week. Let's see, we'll go ahead and open that and look at that in a second. Yeah. The name of the game still not being pointed to, the link to the game still not be pointing to. I'm a grown adult. I would like to actually see the game for myself and make my own decisions, because if you let me make my own decisions, then I might have actually sided with Video Games Chronicles, but probably not, because this is still just a push for censorship. It's just trying to set a precedent so they can do it again for a lesser offensive game the next time. The Home Secretary of the UK said this sort of vile material featured in the game is already currently illegal, which, yeah, I don't know if fictional stories of rape and incest are legal in the UK, then yeah, that's some pretty heavy censorship that is not actually being enforced, I'm sure. I can't help but wonder if this is the game that I saw that looked like a Shota game, in that there was a young boy character and a big boobed mother-like character. But here you see the Steam page here is just not linked at all. But yeah, I didn't see a screenshot with a woman with a hand clenched around her throat, but fictional stories of choking, heck, even real-world events of choking are not uncommon. Yeah. But yeah, the push continues, certainly, to censor this game, while in no way platforming the game. Let's see. So there's a couple different ways we can do this. We can look at the Wikipedia for women in games. We can look at their own website, and then we can look at Charity Navigator, which I don't know how accurate Charity Navigator is, but it does seem like it's a good source to just get a general idea as far as ratings. And yeah, this one is such a small charity, it's not currently rated at all. The way they give things ratings is often based on their filings, as far as like a 501c charity. Then they consider some other things. Unfortunately, in this case, it's going to be pretty useless because they haven't rated it at all. Yeah, 501c3. Yeah. so we can see what their website looks like. First thing they have here is donations, March 25th. And yeah, you can see some pictures and you can make any first knee-jerk assumptions on the appearance of all these people in the pictures. Yeah. But yeah, it doesn't seem like they've done too much. It doesn't seem like they have much on their website either. Let's see. Not to be confused with gender representation in video games. Women in Games, formerly known as Women in Games, WIGJ, is a UK based, that's why Video Games Chronicles following them. Yeah. Women in Games jobs. So at some point they were actually focused on getting games in, getting women employed, but delisting a game is not getting anybody jobs anywhere. And even their Wikipedia here is incredibly small. Been around since 2015 and seems to have nothing really to say about their successes or their activities at all. Yeah. So yeah, that's not very informative. So yeah, once again, I can only be against censorship. Like, that you're not giving me any kind of link to actually see the game itself. So as a red-blooded American, I have to say boo the censorship, and first and foremost, and try to protect the freedom of speech more than anything else. There are certainly no victims that can be pointed to by somebody making a fictional video game. Clearly the game is not being shoved in the faces of people who did not want to see it, since even I didn't see it. And yeah, can't really say much more than that. Here we have HBO's The Last of Us being renewed for a third season. Yeah. I don't know if they've said what they plan on doing with... I think this is Abby as a character as the seasons go on. Like, there's probably only so much that makeup can change if you're trying to tell the story of the games, because there's just a pretty wide time gap there. And if they narrow the gap, I don't know if that helps anything. I can't help but wonder, particularly since I don't have HBO and haven't seen any of this, if this isn't just gonna maybe go the way of Game of Thrones and then have like a really bad ending that goes in a different direction, or if this is gonna go the way of The Walking Dead and that it's just gonna continue to try and stretch itself out until it stretches itself too thin, and that there may just be Last of Us season 10 at some point coming out, telling stories that have no connection whatsoever to the events of the video game, which maybe that's okay for everybody involved making it. Maybe they're more than happy to say, hey, the TV series is going to just be a similar thing that starts kind of at the same place and has the same name, but at the end of the day will be a completely separate thing. Let's see, Reggie Fils-Aimé has once again decided to come back to video games to say something and then quickly nope out, I'm sure. That's me editorializing. But he's weighed in the Switch 2 Welcome Tour debut by highlighting the success of Wii Sports, subtly commenting that the Switch 2 has a lack of a pack-in game. But yeah, I guess we have to kind of assume at this point that Reggie Fils-Aimé wants to be in charge of Nintendo of America again, and maybe he was asked to leave in maybe a very polite way, maybe in a less than polite way by Nintendo of Japan. I wouldn't be surprised if there was something as simple as Nintendo of Japan's president, who was president when Reggie Fils-Aimé was president of Nintendo of America, knew that he was going to retire and knew that there was going to be this seniority issue where Reggie Fils-Aimé would have been at Nintendo of America longer than the new guy at Nintendo of Japan by a long period. It might also literally be an age thing, just ageism from a Japanese perspective, and that Reggie Fils-Aimé may be older than the new Nintendo of Japan CEO. So them potentially getting rid of Reggie Fils-Aimé and putting in Doug Bowser, so then they could bring in a new CEO of Nintendo of Japan who would be either older chronologically or older in the sense of seniority as far as how long they've worked at Nintendo. That might be the case. But yeah. We certainly are at a point where the economy is bad enough we could see the current CEOs of Nintendo and Microsoft and Sony all just getting replaced once again, but I imagine it would always be for new blood and that they just wouldn't bring back Reggie Fils-Aimé. Plus, I don't have any personal reason why I would want to see him come back. Whoever's in charge of Nintendo of America is just a mouthpiece of a localization company that takes the games made by second-party developers in Japan for the most part and puts an English patch on them at most. Like, I don't think there's a single game that's actually developed out of Nintendo of Europe or Nintendo of America. So yeah. And I don't feel like Reggie Fils-Aimé did anything special while being in charge of Nintendo of America too. What he's saying, though, if we're actually listening to his words instead of just criticizing him, which is a smart thing to do, I guess, is, yeah, the Switch 2 should have a pack-in game. Should it be Mario Kart World? And that'd be nice if you got that for free, or if everybody got it for free. It could also have come with a free year of the digital service, which then would be like having several pack-in games. Pick and choose which ones you want to actually play. The World Tour certainly could have been a pack-in game. That would have made a lot of sense too. Almost certainly you're going to see some attempts of stores like Best Buy to bundle old Switch 1 games with Switch 2 purchases. Really old, less popular games. But yeah, I don't know how many people are gonna really care about that. Let's move on. I'm starting to feel that sleepiness settle in. Ubisoft says players suing over the Crew shutdown shouldn't have expected to own the game forever. The Crew's game was shut down last year, rendering it unplayable. I think inherently, a lot of countries have an implied warranty called fit for purpose, and at this point the argument certainly could be made that the Crew is not fit for purpose as a game that is now completely unplayable. The general idea for fit for purpose is that if you buy a car, there's an implied warranty that it will be street legal and drivable and won't just burst into flames. But yeah, I imagine Ubisoft is just going to try and fight this until they can't fight it anymore, and then they'll agree to some kind of pathetically small settlement. I'm sure they've already run the numbers and decided that it's worth their time to have lawyers fight it out than to just keep the Crew running. Yeah. Switch 2 edition titles contain both the game and the upgrade on the cart, Nintendo has clarified. A customer service rep has previously said the upgrade would come as a download codes. So apparently either they have pivoted on that or that was just bad information. Certainly would make a lot of sense for at least the initial version 1.0 of upgrades to be on the cart. Now, I do think the Switch 2 will be like all other consoles at this point and will heavily want you to be connected to the internet and download updates at the very beginning when you first install games, patching both the base game and the upgrade in this case. But I do think Nintendo is still going to try fairly hard to make sure that when you put a game in a Switch 2 that is in airplane mode, that you can still play the game without having to forego an upgrade. Particularly since Nintendo probably doesn't have the server space and the bandwidth for upgrades to be download codes, and doesn't want to spend the money to have that kind of server space and bandwidth for every single person to be downloading upgrades. And yeah, when you start to think about how sharing games really would play out, that too would add a whole bunch more bandwidth. If sharing a game for 14 days then immediately led to downloading several gigabytes of upgrade code. I'm in a weird position here because I want to tell a story, but I'm also falling asleep, so I don't really want to interrupt myself and tell this story. So I'm going to see if I can keep it in the back of my head and see if we can tell it while we're going through the new games that came out on Steam. The new developer Sirius Studio has been announced with with Bloodborne and Demon Souls producer as co-founder. I think we had already talked about this one, so this might be either new to Video Games Chronicle or one repeated story, which is not a problem. Then that brings us to Gamatsu. Vampire Survivors Free Saga Emerald Beyond collaboration DLC called Emerald Diorama is now available. Interesting. I did have to manually open all the Gamatsu links. Yeah. And this art style feels different from what Vampire Survivors really would look like. So you have a very anime-esque trailer here, when the actual game is this pixely sprite-based visuals. And see, this is one of the examples of what scares me about playing something like Vampire Survivors, is that it does feel like it would just become a giant mess of visual effects, and it would be hard to pay attention to that. So there's a co-op update and new adventures too. So Vampire Survivors still doing a good job as far as maintaining relevancy. Getting updates, I guess, is another thing. A narrative adventure game called Akuma: The Frozen Compass has been announced for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Coming out in 2025. Much like the game Rime, this is just kind of a great example of something that looks nice but may not really have much of a game to it. A 3D action platformer, Duskfade, launches in 2026 for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Which I don't know if those three consoles in particular have a way of being shortened down any further. You almost would call them next generation consoles, but with the PS5 Pro it gets confused, and with the Switch 2 it gets confused. A roguelike character action game called Morbid Metal launches in early access this summer. So, yeah. This looks like that might be something a little bit different. Robots and samurais. Into the Fire extended gameplay trailer and screenshots are available in Gematsu. It just seems like this is some kind of volcano research game from what I can tell. Yeah. Was it called Dante's Ring before? Apparently it was. A slot machine roguelite horror game called Clover Pit has been announced for PC, which, boy, are we getting crazy in the combos of different categories. And see, the weird thing about this in particular is that this might be the first slot machine game that's actually worth playing on Steam that I've found. Which, yeah. In the same way that Bellatro might be the first card game that's really worth playing. Maybe that's the thing, is that simple ideas as far as casino games just need to have crazy twists added to them. An anxiety horror thriller, No, I'm Not a Human, launches for PC this fall, then later for the PS5 and Xbox Series. Which, that looks weird. The fast-paced roguelike first-person shooter Void Breaker has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Let's see what that looks like. Now, I definitely also need to get all of my YouTube shorts made so I can close a whole bunch of tabs before Monday. Katana Zero DLC teaser trailer, development is near completion. It's still free. Want to check out that trailer on Gematsu. Last of Us Complete Bundle announced for the PS5. Again, using the phrase complete. Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition for PS5 launches May 6th alongside the DLC The Three Kingdoms. Mafia The Old Country launches August 8th. Here Gematsu is just straight up saying it in the headline, and then in the subheadline saying it was inadvertently announced by 2K. Street Fighter 6 DLC character Elena launches June 5th, due out alongside the launch of the Switch 2 version. See if we can get a better look at Elena. Yeah, boy did they strategically crop this image here for what she is wearing otherwise. So like a spelling bee, I almost want to know what the country of origin is for this character. With the white hair, she could be Asian, she could be African, she could be several different cultures. I'm gonna have to assume African, as we have a bunch of Africans playing music and dancing here. Yep. Arguably, maybe they are playing a little too much on stereotypes, and this might be an example of where Japanese always get in trouble when making a game, and that whenever they depict an African, it comes off as too much of a stereotype. Okay, well, I don't know. New character for Street Fighter 6. How is Street Fighter 6 doing these days, I wonder? Do we have an actual link on Steam to see how it's doing? Mostly positive in the last 30 days, 78%. Overall, very positive at 84%. So the slight complaints at the early days, I think, of the art style of Street Fighter 6, I think have mostly gone away, and I think there were some slight complaints about just the character roster and the lineup, in that a lot of the characters in Street Fighter are not kind of classic characters you'd recognize from Street Fighter 2, although there is a couple of them certainly in that case. Yeah, Street Fighter 6 has apparently gone through a lot of effort to introduce or reintroduce characters. I mostly don't recognize most of these characters in the foreground. I think it was actually Street Fighter 5 that was much worse received than Street Fighter 6. Anyways, the Sega Genesis Nintendo Switch Online adds eSWAT, City Under Siege, Streets of Rage, and Super Thunder Blade. I feel like I've heard of eSWAT, but let's see if we can actually see any gameplay of any of these games. Although I'm not sure they're actually going to show you any actual gameplay. Streets of Rage would be the Sega Genesis version port of the arcade game. I think Streets of Rage was an arcade game. Beat 'em up game. Streets of Rage may be the one where you get a lot of weapons and chickens and food to eat. Streets of Rage might also be the one where you beat up on the cars. I'm not sure. And then here you have the, I think, what is it called, Mode 7 style of game. But if this was a Sega Genesis game, it actually wouldn't have Mode 7. Mode 7 was for Super NES. So this is just a 3D game. Um, No, and I don't think I've actually seen this game ever, but certainly plenty of games like this existed. As far as just these slow procedural shooters where you have to clear an entire area and avoid as much damage as possible. All of those feel like pretty low quality games and arcadey in some ways, that designed to make you die and have to put another quarter in. Let's see. Kagado Studio announces a Japanese-style fantasy visual novel called Dear Mirror Flower for PC. Is this the maker of the game Mirror? Because that adult game sold like hotcakes for a couple years. In part, I think, because it was like selling for 69 cents. Something like that. Something really cheap. But at one time, Mirror was like one of the top 10 games selling. What's funny is they're calling it Japanese style, so I have to assume that means it's not actually a Japanese company. The art style looks a little bit off in that the heads feel a little stretched, and there are some weird Dutch angles on the cameras, and you don't see that very often in video games at all, but visual novels in particular. I don't think I've ever seen it before. By Dutch angles, I mean characters and the cameras are tilted. Yeah, this puts me in a weird position where I'm making a YouTube short on a visual novel just because they bothered to put out a press release. But that has been pretty much my standard. Instead of trying to curate it, just make a YouTube short for everything that puts out a press release, and that's good enough. World of Goo 2 for Steam launches April 25th. I don't think I'll be bothering to play it myself, though, for two reasons. One, I think trying to make footage for World of Goo once, I played the game twice and then got copyright stricken or content ID claimed twice. And two, I just don't think the game is really worth covering. Not again worth playing. Not for me. Maybe for people who really loved World of Goo. The pixel art horror life simulation and action RPG hybrid called Neverway has been announced for PC. Man, it really is just how many tags and descriptions can you have in your game announcement? Whereas I would just kind of call this an RPG, top-down RPG game from the looks of it. Tears of Metal open beta is now available. I'll leave it at that. Assume if it's an open beta, then this is a game that probably has some multiplayer aspect to it. Sacrifier launches in Q1 of 2026 for PC, and then later in 2026 for PS4 and 5, Xbox One and Series and Switch. Take note that this is the first game that has mentioned any of the previous generation consoles at this point. PS4, Xbox One, and Switch. Yeah. This looks like there might be something to this. Endless Legend 2 launches in early access this summer. Already made a short on that. A open world survival first person shooter Frostrail has been announced for PC. Again, this really goes to show why the macro needs to work as far as just automatically opening all of these tabs. Moonlighter 2 The Endless Vault launches this summer. I don't think I ever really got to the point where I wanted to play Moonlighter 1, but this does look like it might be pretty big improvement over Moonlighter 1. Enshrouded surpasses 4 million players. Early access Thralls of Twilight update launches in May. Which, okay, I guess people are playing Enshrouded even now. They moved where they were putting the links. Yep. Overall, being received very positively. Still in early access though. Blue Blaze Entropy Effect Couch Co-op update is coming soon, with a Dead Cells collaboration character being announced. I feel like Blue Blaze Entropy Effect is a fighting game, but apparently not. It's a platforming hack and slash game from the looks of it, although they're calling it an action roguelite like action adventure game. Opus Prism Peak launches this fall. It's a story-driven adventure game getting a release week window. Is this the same Opus game, or is this a sequel? Because yeah, there was a game called Opus. I don't know if it had Prism Peak in the name originally, but yeah, we got the first hints at this game existing a long time ago, and that it was going to have this photography element to it, and maybe some kind of time travel element here, or you just have an old man and a much younger anime girl. Yeah, there was another Opus Games. Can we go back and actually pause the video and see what that said? Yeah. From the creators of Opus Echo of Star Song and Opus Rocket Whispers. So apparently there's been two other Opus games. So there's a whole series of these games, and then seemingly some kind of weirdness going on. So I guess the question is, so you have this companionship of a spirit of a girl who doesn't have any memory of who she was. Okay, and so you're going to just be seeing a whole bunch of spirits. Yeah, weirdly, there is no direct link here to any other Opus games, so either those games are not released on Steam, or I'm gonna have to do more research. Yeah, how they end up with a prologue, I don't know. So yeah, this game is overwhelmingly positive. Echo of Star Song Full Bloom, and feels like it's a very different story being told. And this game is very positive. And now that I look at it, I now remember this series, which is a very weird series in that it starts off telling this narrative story with basically pixely sprites, and then it evolves into bigger sprites, and then it evolves into even more better animation. And Opus here looks completely different as far as an animation style. So it does just feel like this developer is calling everything Opus, and maybe there's very little connection otherwise to it, to the games. Which that does create a weird situation for any content creator, in that do I really feel the need to go back and purchase and play 3 other Opus games to play this Opus game? I don't feel like the Opus games in particular were that popular, so I think a lot of people are going to be in that position. Of course, a major amount of people are also going to say, hey, this looks like an anime game, it looks like an old man hanging around with a girl, we feel like that's probably a little too creepy for our taste. And so it very possibly will be a game that gets rejected by a lot of people before people even give it a chance. Moving on, Heroes of Might and Magic Golden Era launches in early access this summer, which I guess this is a Dryad character if I was to guess. Seems like she may have quite the set of cleavage there. Now, the thing about this is I still don't know if it's a new game. I guess it is. It's a new installment of the renowned series of turn-based strategy games where action takes place in Inrath on the continent of Jadame, mentioned but never explored in Heroes of Might and Magic in a Heroes of Might and Magic game before. Now, I do think the Might and Magic series is completely devoid and separate from the Dungeons and Dragons storylines, or the Magic the Gathering storyline that is also now connected to Dungeons and Dragons. And I swear Might and Magic originally was not part of the Dungeons and Dragons canon, but at some point Hasbro acquired Wizards of the Coast, and then it started becoming connected. So you have this cinematic trailer showing you the battles, but the actual experience is going to very much be turn-based, tile-based gameplay still. And so this is just going to be way overly animated. And this trailer here is really designed to just show off as many different factions as possible. Which we can see 5 factions there, all of which seem like they're somewhat new. Of course, when you look at the screenshots, here's what the game really looks like. And while I am somewhat excited about this game, it could also be pretty terrible. It's been a long time since Heroes of Might and Magic 3 Gold Edition, and it could very well just be such a slow-paced, long game that takes hours and hours to do one campaign, just has no use of existing in modern times. So yeah, what I would really want to hope is that there's only as much as 30% nostalgia in this new Heroes of Might and Magic game, and then there's 70% of optimization in that it just has figured out some way to speed up the whole thing. And the big way you could do that is if there was an autoplay button, or if there was a skip button, or if there was a 2x speed with autoplay or 4x speed with autoplay, but even that may not be enough. But yeah, I would be certainly rather happy to see if this came out and was very well received, but I don't really anticipate that happening. And weirdly, I kind of feel like this is more of a tablet game these days than something that really needs to be on the PC. It may not actually work, however, very well on something like a Steam Deck, where the screen may just be too small. And it almost certainly wouldn't work on a cell phone. Let's see, Deep Rock Galactic Survivor launches on September 17th. And let's check out its Steam page. Again, all I'm really doing here is seeing if it's on the follow list. If it's on the follow list, that means I've already made a YouTube short around it. The Altars launches June 13th. We haven't seen anybody really talk about the Altars in a while. Which, yeah. I think they probably overhyped this game and advertised this game way too early. So, if it is coming out in June 13th, around June 13th is really when we should have first heard about the game and gotten a big push around it. Speedrunners 2 Kings of Speed announced for PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. King of Speed, not Kings. Yeah, maybe there's probably a big audience there. We already talked about Rematch, and I wonder if we are going to go in circles here. We shouldn't, but who knows. Survivors like roguelike action game Ember and Blade has been announced for PC. This is an interesting art style. It feels just different in that it has kind of these tones of skin tone to it, and the angles sometimes come off as a little sharp. Almost feels a little French in its art style, if I was to generally pick, I guess. That being said, it again is just a game where you're mostly going to be looking at screens like this. The art style may not matter that much. Mobile Suit Gundam Seed Battle Destiny Remastered has a systems introduction trailer on Gamatsu if you want to check that out. I imagine Mobile Gundam Suit Seed might be the next game we see on Gamatsu that just puts out a little bit of more information every week for a very, very long time. Although if it's due out May 22nd, it won't be that long. Fantasy Life I, The Girl Who Steals Time, Alchemist Life Trial gameplay footage is also on Gamatsu. Spirit Hunter Deathmark DLC Chapter 7, Kaarazu's Amusement Park for Switch is now available in the West. Which, okay, I wasn't thinking. I think I kind of recognize this game, but didn't realize it was an episodic game that seems to be charging a lot of money. Oh, how is this being released here? Because this took me to Spirit Hunter Deathmark as a visual novel, which is on my wish list. And there's no update indication here that a Chapter 7 is missing or would be added. So maybe it's a Switch only release scheme where it's episodic. Because yeah, I definitely made the assumption that this was a finished game. It is way too expensive though for a visual novel, even discounted at $20. This would have to be a overwhelmingly positive game to really convince me to want to play that. A anime style open world action adventure or action RPG called Tomo Endless Blue has been announced for PC. Frankly, at this point, saying something is anime style is pointless. It's probably been pointless for years, since so much animation is influenced by anime, and anime itself is an evolution of Disney, early Disney animation. So yeah, there's just too many different things that you could call anime to even call it a consistent style. Of course, Japanese call everything anime because it just means animation, so they don't really believe in a style either. Now, if you're going to tell me it was bright and colorful, that would be much more descriptive. If you were going to tell me that it was the kawaii anime style, well then that would be a little bit descriptive. Or if you're going to say it was the moe art style, that would be descriptive. What I'm actually seeing here, though, doesn't feel like any kind of animation that I really would put in any category. It looks like Western animators somewhere are kind of copying anime, maybe a tiny bit, but really they're just doing their own thing, just making cartoons. The only thing that feels even slightly anime here is it looks like there's a bunch of monsters, like a Pokemon game. Which, yeah, in the actual game you get down to 3D models, which then makes it fairly far from a Pokemon game. Maybe that's not Gamatsu's fault as much as that's just the way the press release described it. Because yeah, Creature Collector game is much more descriptive. But yeah, every single screenshot here does not scream to me anime. It screams to me somebody who is slightly influenced by anime, but is definitely not likely to be a Japanese animator making a product for the Japanese audience first and foremost. The Famitsu sales from the 31st to the 6th update is available. So we saw last time, I think, a decent number of PS5 games making the list. Seems like that's not the case this time. We've got Nintendo Switch once again being a powerhouse, with Monster Hunter Wilds being in the second slot for PS5, and then Assassin's Creed Shadows being in the 14th, and Atelier Yumiya being in the 15th for PS5. And then the Nintendo Switch once again dominating all the way down to the 26th spot for the first Berserker Kazan, and Winning Post is at the 29th spot. And it looks to me like none of the games this week are even new. Hardware sales for the Switch OLED model and Switch Lite are still dominating the top two spots, beating out the PS5 and the PS5 Pro and the PS5 Digital Edition all combined. Xbox Series S and X numbers are still very low, and PS4 and the digital edition of the Series X really, really low. It'll probably be the case that we'll start to see some influence. Well, we would have seen some influence on these charts if anybody in Japan was buying Xboxes in the first place. But yeah, a variation of 5 or 10 people refusing to buy Xbox Series S or Series X consoles because of the tariffs against Japan would be unnoticeable, basically. And pretty much I would assume that every single Xbox bought in Japan is bought by a non-Japanese person. And of course I'm generalizing a little bit there, but only by a tiny amount. So I'd assume it is just military based Americans buying them, or American businessmen or Westerners in general in Japan. Which, speaking of foreigners living in Japan buying things, I saw that PewDiePie has bought land to build a house in Japan, and boy is that house big compared to your standard Japanese house. You know, I'd like to know how many tatami mats, which is how they measure their square footage in houses, it would be. But yeah, it looks like they're probably going to build some kind of modern Swedish type house, since he is Swedish. And it will be a giant mansion by Japanese style. And yeah, it already said that they were going to just stay in Japan, and their apartment was probably too small for their kid to grow up in. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how long they can really stay in Japan. The stereotype is that you can visit Japan for a couple of years, but eventually you're going to realize that your neighbors resent you for not being truly Japanese enough. Even if you try your very best to learn the language and learn the culture, you're just never going to have that lifetime of growing up. And frankly, you're just not going to look Japanese or be Japanese enough for the people in Japan. Of course, that's a stereotype from years ago, so maybe now the situation has changed quite a bit. And certainly for PewDiePie, I imagine he has enough money that that's not going to become an issue. Anyways, let's continue on, since that has nothing to do with video games. The Claire Obscure Expedition 33 character trailer, Monaco, is available if you want to check that out on Komatsu. Date everything launches June 17th. Yeah. This is one that was announced a long time ago. I'm not sure I really remember this, but it's on the follow list. Spray Paint Simulator has added a PS4 and 5 versions due out in May. Yeah. Fragpunk for the PS5 and Xbox Series launches April 29th. Where Winds Meet is the name of the game, has a closed beta for the PS5 and PC set for May 16th to the 19th. I don't think there's a Steam link for this game yet. And yeah, that is the totality of everything that I had opened. So we can go on to the Gaming on Linux article. The smash hit Drug Sim Schedule 1 plans full Steam Deck support and will use Steam Deck as the performance benchmark, which means they're going to try and optimize for the Steam Deck, I would assume. So, yeah. I don't know if that really means too much, though, because inherently, Schedule 1 probably can succeed any other way, even if it didn't manage to actually support the Steam Deck or ran very poorly on the Steam Deck. It may very well be a game that's just also always in early access. Prime Gaming for April 11th list is here on Gaming on Linux. Every time we look at this, though, I say unless it's a Steam link or a game on Steam, I really just don't care about it. Let's see, the comedy narrative driven isometric adventure game called Paradigm Island is in need of Linux testers, which I guess you probably have to sign up for it, since it's not actually out yet. Boy, do I hate it every time I yawn. And yeah, there's no way people aren't hearing that. I guess I could go quiet and yawn, but generally these yawns come up unexpectedly. Vampire Survivors free Square Enix Saga crossover DLC. Yeah. Apparently Vampire Survivors has native Linux support not advertised, and Valve rated it Steam Deck verified. Interesting that it has Linux support, but it's not advertised. Yeah, like the DLC. Yeah, I guess it would be this DLC, and I don't think I can actually make YouTube shorts based on DLC. Nor should I really bother to make YouTube shorts based on DLC. I'm still also getting sleepier and sleepier by the second here. EgoSoft reveals a big free diplomacy update for X4 Foundations due out in 2025. Okay, I'll make a YouTube short on it, but I'm not even going to bother to put it on the fault list since it's just not my type of games. Shape Z2 Big Dimension update arrives June 2nd with 3D platform building. I'd assume this is a game. Yeah, it's a factory type game. Still in early access. Wall of Goo 2 is coming to Steam with new levels on April 25th, which I think it may have been an Apple Arcade game originally. Let's see, you can get Ghost Runner, Neon Abyss, Anno Mutatium, and more in the Neon Lights Humble Bundle. Now weirdly, I think my macro did somehow end up clicking on this Humble Bundle and opening that page, which I don't see a real reason why that would have happened or worked. Instead, the macro also opened up this game, which would have made sense. But I kind of feel like it did both. I'm not sure it really did, though. At this point, I'm half asleep, so anything I say might be wrong. Let's look at GameDeveloper.com quickly. There's an update here that the Molasses Flood, which was a company, has been absorbed into CD Projekt Red. The dev team will continue to work on the Witcher multiplayer spin-off Project Sirius within CD Projekt Red proper, but the studio itself has essentially been dissolved, which is one of those rare cases that a corporation is dissolved and dies, and the employees are given a chance to continue working and have their livelihood be earned. Where it's almost always the exact opposite of that, where a company lays off everybody before shuttering itself down, or slowly lays off people piece by piece until there's only a couple people left. It would be an interesting world, certainly, if there was like government rules and regulations that said if you're going to lay off people, an agency can come in and evaluate your financials, and instead of letting you lay off people, it just determines that you should shutter the company completely, or you should lay off the CEOs instead of the associate level, low level employees. Although if an agency did come in and say you're just shutting down the company completely, that would just lay off more people, but it wouldn't drag out the slow death of many companies. There's a report that Nintendo is delaying the Switch 2 in China. It may very well be that the Switch 2 just gets delayed in a lot of places. Let's see. Ubisoft tells the Crew players they never actually owned the game, saying the ongoing lawsuit concerning the Crew is based on a faulty assumption of game ownership, which legally might be true but doesn't help their case in the court of public opinion. Industry veterans have established OniB to create the most accessible UGC open world ever. I don't know what UGC stands for. Yeah. Not really explaining what UGC stands for, are they? Let's see. Apparently SAG-AFTRA has received bipartisan congressional support for the Anti-Deepfake and AI Act. The No Fakes Act is aimed at protecting actors, recording artists, and broadcasters alike. I imagine it is also aimed at protecting politicians, and that's why it's getting bipartisan support. That being said, I'm not sure that means it's actually going to pass or get signed into law. But yeah. At a certain point, if you can make some protections against deep faking anyone, that's probably a good thing. And maybe make some rules and regulations severely restricting what one can do with AI might be very helpful too. Let's see. Apparently actors unions also protested outside the BAFTAs to call for better working conditions in the UK. Union leadership said they hope to catch the attention of some of the richest companies in the world. Which actors union would this have been? Though in the UK. Maybe it was SAG-AFTRA, but I thought SAG-AFTRA was in the United States only, so I'm not sure. And again, I'm falling asleep, so really can't research it any further. The US tariff pause could give Nintendo time to amass a Switch 2 stockpile. A 90-day reprieve for countries was announced, but yeah. I don't know how much of a stockpile you really can make there. In a weird way, this chaos might be quite the boon for warehouses and logistics companies if all of a sudden many companies are stockpiling a ton of things, a ton of product on their shelves, and building potentially more warehouses to stockpile even more. It might also finally get rid of the just-in-time concept, which was a concept that was introduced as far as shipping and delivering things, which was supposed to be more efficient and more cost effective, but fell apart originally when things like the COVID pandemic happened, and all of a sudden everything just got slowed down. So it really was a gamble that only works on the best of days and never on the worst of days. And going back to the idea of having warehouses full of product is probably wiser. And it has been certainly the way things have been done in the past. And that is certainly one industry, I guess, in the United States that could be a boom, because it doesn't really require that much training or that much technology or hardware. All you really need, if you're willing to pay for it, is a factory that can move pallets around and maybe put things from the pallets on shelves if you're going to resort any of the things. But really, for a lot of things, you might not resort anything. It might just be an 18-wheeler backs up to your warehouse. You take the pallets of things off the 18-wheeler, put them in a corner, and then wait until a redistributor orders a pallet and then put it back on the back of a different 18-wheeler. Moving on, the Saber Interactive CEO has donated $5 million for Game Industry Institute at the University of Texas. Matt Karsh, CEO and co-founder of Saber Interactive, appears to be the first game industry with his name on the university program. I assume this is him depicted in a Warhammer armor. I feel like this is definitely a case where he probably wanted some tax write-offs and very possibly wanted an honorary doctorate, which could also be the case. Which, in fairness, if I had infinite money, I would probably pay for an honorary doctorate too at a even decently established college. But there is a question here: is how does this really become news to your average gamer? It just kind of doesn't matter. The biggest thing I guess you take away from this is that the CEO had $5 million extra dollars to spend for a donation to a college. This might very well have been a case where he spent $5 million to make a program to help train the next generation of game makers, which might be a little bit more generous, but still, if you have $5 million extra to spend, you almost certainly took it out of the pockets of your lower level workers who probably deserve a raise instead. Alright, now I'm going to try as quickly as possible to go through all the new games on Steam. While we're doing that, I will... Is this a memory game or is this a match? I don't know what this is. We'll check this out later. So yeah, I was looking at my personal Facebook, and in previous years I would post on very rare occasions, thoughts. And so one of the thoughts I had from many years ago is that in the comics of Zelda games, there were 3 Triforces at one point. A Triforce of Wisdom, which Zelda had, a Triforce of Power, which Ganondorf had, and a Triforce of, I want to say Faith, but I don't think that was it. It was something like Faith, though. It was like willpower, but it wasn't willpower. It wasn't a Green Lantern thing. It wasn't loyalty. It wasn't hope. But yeah, well, regardless, there was a 3rd Triforce, and that was the one that Link always ended up getting, was that 3rd Triforce. Here we have another game that almost certainly should be in the adult section. And kind of hyper-realistic thumbnail, not nowhere accurate to what you're saying here. But yeah. So what I speculated there many years ago, and it's important to emphasize this, is that there was a lot of room for spin-off Zelda games. Ones where it would be more logic puzzle based, and you would play as Zelda with the Triforce of Wisdom and her representing wisdom, which they finally actually did do that and made a Zelda game where you played as Zelda and were solving puzzles in a little bit more logical of a way. The other suggestion, though, was that there could have been spin-off games where you play as Ganondorf and it's all just a beat-em-up violent style game with the Triforce of Power and an anti-hero type thought, which they really haven't done that. There's a little bit of that in the Zelda Warriors games, but even then you're not really playing as Ganondorf by default or exclusively. So yeah, that's the story I wanted to tell. It's not really a story of they stole my idea as much as they finally just had a pretty obvious idea based on how they had set up the original concept in the first place, which is probably not even canon anymore, and that the Triforces are, there's only one Triforce. But yeah, I guess I have to take this one off the follow list if it's mixed already. Yep. So I guess it is more of a story of I thought of it first, which in fairness, having a thought and implementing a thought are 2 very different things, and when I had the thought, it probably would have come out as a very different game than the Zelda game that did come out where you played as Zelda. And even in that Zelda game where you play as Zelda and the Princess Peach game, both are now noticeably not being mentioned when the Switch 2 is being released. That there is no real desire to continue with these quote girl games. And if we do get an afterthought girl game, I imagine it's not going to be much of anything. And what's funny is this Amber Alert, you'd think that you probably wouldn't want a game by that name, and weirdly I don't think this has anything to actually do with an Amber Alert, as in a child is missing or been kidnapped, as much as this is just a horror game. The Amber alerts, I think, are in part inspired by different color-coded messages that would be announced in hospitals. And for the most part, there's kind of a standard on what the colors mean, but there may be a few hospitals that don't follow the same standard. Brown alert, for instance, is like somebody dropped feces somewhere on the floor. But those are all called code something. Code blue, code black, code red. And weirdly, in the code system, I think a missing child is not actually amber. Of course, the idea of having the alert system sounds like a great idea, but I can't help but wonder to think that very few people have actually been saved or rescued compared to how much it interrupts people's lives. And certainly there's been incidences where these alert systems on phones have been abused to put out notices that really were not welcome and were not really helpful. Yeah. And even when like there's a national or a not national but a local weather emergency alert, even if when the weather is bad around me, I think I personally would prefer to just not be informed. I'd rather just go about my day, and if a tornado hits me, a tornado hits me. A lot of times there's not that much you can really do anyways. Some of the suggestions for tornadoes in particular seem to be kind of silly and unlikely to be that helpful. I might have something more to say if I was awake more, but probably not. I think I've kind of said everything I have to say for today. I do wish my sleep schedule still was a little bit better. It does kind of feel like here, now that we are just approaching like 6 p.m., I might have been able to actually have gone to sleep and then woken up at 10, and I tried to go in that direction. But a major part of my decision making here is just coming down to what do I feel like when it's about time to stream, or at like 10 in the morning. What do I feel like? Do I feel like I'm going to fall asleep? Or do I feel like I'm going to agonize over trying to fall asleep for the next 4 to 6 hours? And yes, this morning it definitely felt like I was going to agonize trying to fall asleep. Give that a chance. Here you have a character that has skin tone top on her. This is War of Gods 2. Name confusion, nonsense, asset flip. We really don't get too many of those though. We get too many where one is too many in that sense, but if it actually made money, if it actually sold, you would think you would see multiple asset flip games like that coming out every single day. It just doesn't seem like that's the case. In fact, today in particular, it feels kind of good as far as the games that have come out, in that it feels like, while I am rejecting quite a few of them, as usual, it feels like there's a decent effort being put into a lot of these games too. and that they aren't just low effort asset flips. But maybe also I'm just being too generous and not looking at things with a particularly critical eye. Come on. There's almost certainly going to be a point where I do just fall asleep on stream. If that was the case, you would almost certainly just hear me snoring or something. I don't know if I actually do snore. There'd just be no one watching that could in any way wake me up. Yeah. I don't know any way that would actually happen, that anything would wake me up. I probably would just sleep soundly, streaming for several hours. At least until an alarm clock went off, which my alarm clocks are also kind of insanity at the moment, in that I have alarm clocks in the evening, alarm clocks in the morning, and I am pretty much just randomly dismissing them most of the time. I feel like there was a VR version of this game, and yeah, I'd hoped at some point there would have been a non-VR version of a game like that. I guess I finally got that hope fulfilled. And again, it feels like every time my air conditioner kicks in, like I would want it to not kick in and try and save a few bucks, but that's not gonna happen. Well, at some point I guess I closed the end of show thumbnail, so we are at the end here. And actually, once again, I managed to stream in less than 3 hours. It feels like it was more than 3 hours though, but doesn't seem like that was the case. So yeah, that's going to be it for the stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.